Hello and welcome to the God the Artist podcast. I am your host, Morgan McCarver, and today we have special guest Rodney, and I'm a little afraid to try to pronounce your last name.
It is
um,
Carpentier.
Carpentier. Awesome. Well, I have been looking forward to talking with you. You're definitely the first law enforcement personnel to have on my podcast. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I've been in law enforcement for just shy of 20 years. I work in a sheriff's office in New York State, and over the last almost 4 years now, I have been trying my hand at becoming a independent novelist and writer, and I've written and released two books out of my trilogy, and I'm currently struggling through getting the third one done.
Oh, wow. Did you know it was going to be a trilogy before you started?
Yes. The first page, my my narrator, my framing device in the books is actually a true crime podcaster.
Mm.
So it's first person from his point of view, and he specifically calls out in the first page, like, oh, I've always, trilogies have always been kind of, the thing in my past. So, we'll do a trilogy. And so now I've kind of set myself up for a trilogy, and part of me feels like I could write more, but part of me also says, no, I really want to be done with this also.
I relate to that. You know, you love the project, but then once you're deep in it, it's like, okay, ready to be done with that. Did you always know you were going to be a writer? Were there early signs of creativity when you were a kid?
Absolutely. My mom and I would sit there on rainy Sundays, and we would try to plan a mystery out, and we would, try to organize more traditional kind of Agatha Christie type mysteries.
Mm.
Back then, this is more what I write now is more like crime procedural with my background in law enforcement. So I kind of write, it's bigger than that. But my true love is kind of the, I call closed box or closed room mystery, where it can only be certain people, and then the detectives kind of got to sort through all the characters. So I would do that with my mom early on, and I've always been a writer. Dabbled in music for a couple of years, so I've always kind of had, a foot in some kind of creative venture or another over my whole life.
That's awesome. I am super big into like all the mystery stuff right now. I've listened to a lot of books on tape. So I've listened to all of the Sherlock Holmes and I'm going through the Agatha Christie now, which saying that sounds like I'm a nerd, but I guess I am. But how do you go about writing that? Do you start with like, okay, now I know who the murderer is and like back up from there, or do you start at the beginning?
So this trilogy started out with an idea that came through my head in the middle of the night. So
Mm.
I was working a double. I started at 3 in the afternoon, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning,
Oh
and
gosh.
I was trying to keep myself awake. Um, and again, I had been listening to a lot of true crime podcasts at the time, so this idea was in my head. So and around this time in 2022 was like right after they had a lot of DNA cases back to back to back. Like you had the Golden State Killer was identified through DNA later on, and so this kind of, I guess, was in my head. So I'm sitting there trying to stay awake, and this idea came through my head that what if you as a person knew you grew up in an adopted family. You had grown up in this, and you'd been content with that your whole life, but now as an adult, now you wanted to go search for your biological family. And when you did one of these DNA tests, instead of, some scary thing coming back that you're related to a serial killer or something like that, it was more of, what if your mother was the victim of an
Mm.
unsolved cold case homicide? And what would that do? So that was kind of the impetus for this whole story. Um and so I started kind of exploring that character for a little bit, and I was like, I don't have that didn't happen to me. I didn't grow up in an adoptive family. I wanted this person to be a woman and a mother, and a traditional mother, has a big family, and now this whole thing is completely rocking her world. I didn't have that experience, so I couldn't really write from her perspective at that point. So what I did was I kind of turned it on its head and said, well, what about the law enforcement officers who are involved? What if you have a guy who is more of a newer police officer, a rookie, and his dad was the person who actually found this found this crime scene when he was a rookie, and kind of just trying to creating these parallels between them, and him and our main character, this rookie police officer, trying to come to terms with his father's past, and it kind of rolled out of from there.
Wow, that is super fascinating. You kind of worked it from like all angles then, which sounds like a great way to tell a good story.
Yes. And as for knowing who did it, I've had a good idea from the beginning. The only one who knows who it is my daughter, because she used to ask me, like, who did it in the end, Dad? And I'm like, all right, well, it's this person.
So how long does it take you to write a book?
So the first book took me a year and a half. I began the idea came to me in May of 2022. And I struggled through the first probably 6 months trying to figure out how to actually write. I had taken creative writing in college, but that wasn't my major. I majored in English, but that's kind of more of a literature studying kind of thing. I did take a couple of creative writing classes. I took a screenplay class. So I kind of understood the story end of things. And I have all these wonderful textbooks that I never opened in college, like Story by Robert McKee and The Hero's Journey and all these things. I never opened those books. So I was like, all right, well, let's go back and pretend we're in college again. And as I kind of looked at them, I'm like, all right. And I tried to mash this story, this idea into that framework, and I'm trying to make it work, and it wasn't working for me. And it took, again, podcasts are my source of a lot of information. So I went and I found a couple of different writing podcasts, and I learned all about the Save the Cat story structure system, which is typically how they talk about structuring films.
Mm.
And specifically, they looked this podcast looked at The Hunger Games, which is actually a movie I had seen. I did not read the books, but I had seen the movies, so I understood the visual medium of it. And she explained the different story beats that come in Save the Cat, as going with this film, and it just clicked for me, and that's how I was able to structure it. So after I got that, it took me another probably 6 to 8 months to kind of really work through that, and I ended up finishing the very first draft of the first book in December of 2023. And then I began the editing process and learning all about how to do this as an independent. Did about 6 months of that, and I finally decided I finally made the final decision to independently publish in August of 2024, and I released the first book about 6 weeks later, which was way too quick. So that whole process, beginning to end, was a little over 2 years. The second book I started writing while I was finishing up the editing and publishing process on the first book. So the second book, actually, I finished exactly a year later in December of 2024. Took some time to do the editing and the independent publishing process with that. And the second book came out in August of 2025.
Awesome.
So
Congratulations.
thank you. So those came really super quick. And now the third book, I am mired in the middle and I cannot figure out my way out of it. So
Ooh, ooh. Is it what do they call it? Writer's block, or is it more something else?
um I felt like I wrote a lot of checks in the first two books, and now I have to cash all of them and I have to pay off all these little things. So I feel like every time I write something, I'm like, well, wait a minute. Well, this has got to connect back to this part over here from book one, but also take care of something in book two and make sure it had, so there's just a lot of thinking. When I was writing book two, I was just like, send it, create more lore for yourself and do a lot more for yourself in this. And now in the third book, I'm trying to, I'm also trying to do something a little bit different in each book too, so they don't feel like it's formulaic.
Mm.
And I kind of want to, I want Mike, the main character, to learn things as the audience is learning them. It's
Mm.
he's not ahead of you and you're not ahead of him. It's kind of as things happen, he's there and you're there with him as he finds things out. So it's but I have to be ahead of them, and that's kind of the hard part at this time.
Right. Yeah. Is there any specific character that you relate to or is based off of your experience?
Um, all of my law enforcement characters, I try to use people that I know, or at least amalgams of them. Um, so I'm not creating these very flat kind of law enforcement characters like, this is the, alcoholic detective, or this is the haunted veteran. I want them to kind of really kind of have this real feeling. So Mike, I relate to Mike because a lot of his traits are where I was when I was new. And I've been doing this a while now, and I've kind of moved up the ladder as a supervisor. So I kind of see how the newer generation of law enforcement officers and the younger folks who are coming on the job now are kind of interacting and working with things. So I kind of relate to that. But I also relate to the older characters now too, because I am the old guy. So I have a couple of characters who are in their 50s. I'm not in my 50s, but just seeing some of the older guys and the feeling that they have, like, I've been there, I've done that, and listen, rookie, I have all, I know all the answers when maybe they don't. So I kind of relate to all those characters in a little bit. I think every little law enforcement character has a piece of me, or at least my thought process to a degree.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever heard of an author of like mystery type stories being a actually in law enforcement. So like you have this whole background knowledge and understanding of how the process works that us lay people would not even think about.
Um, Correct. I mean, police procedures are kind of a big genre when it comes to mysteries, but um, which what I find is I don't want to be CSI and be so clinical and so kind of removed from the process. Um, I focus a lot on more of the interpersonal stuff between the officers that I put on the page, to make them, again, make those interactions feel real, and make
Mm,
those locker room talk, or the way that they pick on each other, but there's really this love and this appreciation between them. But you know even regardless of gender, both male and female police officers, we kind of have this understanding that you know you got to be able to take a little bit of the world's pain, and the way that we kind of prime you for that is by being tough on you. And they I got told early on, basically it was, if we didn't pick on you, that means we don't like, if we didn't pick on you, we wouldn't like you.
mm,
So the ribbing and the jokes and stuff at your expense are, a little bit of that, um uh
like
kind of
growing a thicker skin kind of
growing a
thing.
thicker skin, just rite of passage. That was kind
Mm,
of the word I was looking for. It's kind of the rite of passage, and you kind of got to endure that in order to get through. But it's the intent. It's well intentioned, even if it
hmm.
doesn't feel that way at the time.
Yeah. I'm sure that creates like a stronger bond too, to know, oh yeah, these guys got my back.
Yeah.
Um, so let's talk about your faith as well. That comes into the book. How do you kind of weave that part in?
So Mike, my main character, is a rookie police officer, but his little bit of his prior life, he had gone to Catholic school, boarding school, and was actually pursuing the priesthood before his father's passed away, and he kind of has this big resentment. So as he's going into the seminary process, and he's talking to the other religious folks, and his teachers and stuff, they kind of basically say, "You're not ready yet. You're not ready for this life because you have all this resentment with your father." And so that's what kind of leads him into this role as a police officer. He says, "Well, if I need to understand my dad and kind of get past this, I need to walk in his shoes a little bit.
Mm.
And, and obviously it kind of leads all this, this whole way. And then he has, so he doesn't really necessarily have a crisis of faith, but it's just a crisis of, being truly dedicated,
Hmm.
and again, that forgiveness aspect that he can't get past. And he's got, two of his close friends who are also, police officers with him are kind of his older mentor, who is not at all religious, not is just kind of more of the steady, hey, this is how, survive in this job and in his career. And then he has a second friend who's a little bit younger, who is more traditional, has a family, and his faith is really important to him. And he's kind of like this other example. So Mike's a little torn between these two examples also. Um, and in the second book, there, because we start getting into, adoptions and the Catholic adoption system, specifically up in Albany County around, the early 1980s, when that part of the book takes place. There's a kind of a lot of there's a lot of connections that are made to how things used to be in the church and the Catholic Church, and how they've kind of developed since then.
Wow. Do you experience that in your own workplace, like different Christian mentors?
Yes. I specifically, I have a friend right now, who he came to Jesus very later in life. And he and his wife chose to bring their family to a Baptist church. And, he was very, very content in that and very comfortable in that community, and was doing well. But as he started to research more and more, he just feels like he needs something, um, he feels kind of like his pull towards more traditional. So he's exploring a ton of stuff. So we're the same, rank level. So we'll typically, go out and get coffee together, and we'll talk about his faith and where he's going. And again, I'm a they call us cradle Catholics. I kind of grew up in it. So a lot of the stuff that I grew up with, I take for granted, because it's like, oh, we've always done things that way. That's normal for me, where he's actually giving me a lot of context, because he's so, motivated to learn. So it's been really, really, interesting talking to him constantly. And he gives me a lot of stuff. Like, we're in the Lenten season right now, and he was studying some of the Orthodox, Catholics, and talking about how, for Lent they don't just give up meat on Fridays and, chocolate and something like that. They actually, I believe it's at least 2 days a week, they actually give up all meat altogether. Or during the entire Lent, they give up meat altogether, plus dairy and all. There's a ton of sacrifice there, so it actually kind of motivated me to do something a little different this year. And, much to my wife's consternation, I'm sort of semi-vegan right now. So, and
Mm,
it's just, it's just a new perspective, because there is, obviously there's a ton of temptation every day to kind of break that fast, and it's really inspired me with that. But then, I find, I won't say casually, but just talking to other coworkers without, having to be, very evangelical about it. It's just talking about them. We share a lot of faith. I actually have a number of Catholic coworkers, and we're able to, just share our experiences. Like, oh, hey, I'm going to this, or, I went to this mass, or, oh, hey, it's that time of the year again. And, it's very comfortable. And I was never really comfortable talking about my faith, until more recently.
that's great. I grew up in a Baptist church, and I also am looking kind of at the traditional, more specifically Anglican in my area.
Hmm.
But I think there is a pull towards the things that we've been missing with the evangelical type churches. I think now we're kind of circling back around as a generation, looking for that tradition, the structure of that type of church. I love like the call and response type things
Hmm.
and the different prayers. And yeah, Lent, just handling the whole Lent season, differently and really looking at like what does it mean to sacrifice? Like it's not like the, dieting plan of Easter kind of thing, and really figuring out all of that. Um, yeah, it's really fascinating, especially to see different denominations handle Christianity so differently, but it's all it's all the same in the end, and it's all a little bit different too, you know?
Yeah, my coworker kind of says it like we're all climbing the mountain, and it's just we may all end up there, but it's the path or the how you take it, and I really like that metaphor. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I think believing in Christ is, you know, absolute. Believing in God and believing in Christ are the first steps in that, and there are a number of ways to get there, and um, you know, I think most people are going to get there in the end. It's just what you believe in, and how you approach that. Is important for you and your personal um your personal path.
Right. Yeah. And the Holy Spirit just working to open your eyes, open your heart to that right moment when you do kind of grasp it and accept it. My workplace is not specifically Christian, so I wear a cross necklace. I just like never take it off. And then that sometimes opens up the conversation because, like you, I don't always just like jump to, oh, let me, if, even talk about my testimony to a stranger right now. Like that's just not who I am. That's not really my approach. But to be able to kind of weave it into conversation, whether they're believers or not, it does kind of help open up the topic where it doesn't seem so pushy.
Yeah.
Um, so your first two books have been released. How have they been received? Like within the Christian community, or have you gotten feedback about that?
I haven't specifically really marketed it towards, a Christian community necessarily. In general, I think most of my no one's really hit on those themes that I've seen, and I'm not a huge review person. Like I'm not going in, oh, what did this person think? I wrote it, it's out there, and I appreciate people giving me some positive feedback and things like that. But for the specific Christian kind of undertones and themes that are in there, I haven't heard a lot about that just yet. And I think podcasts like this and kind of opening up that community, no, it's not a Christian book. It is not a clean book either. Neither one of them. You know, they're also not super graphic. There's no super violence or gore or anything like that. But like I said, I'm trying to establish that camaraderie and that kind of that locker room talk. So there are some choice words in there, and I'm not necessarily proud of that. Something I might change in the future, but I think the overall kind of journey that Mike is on would translate over to more of a Christian community, to understand that again, not a crisis of faith, but somebody who's on a faith journey and trying to figure out where he's going next.
Hmm. I think so many of us are so afraid to question or to have moments of doubt that it's like you're saying, it's like a journey of faith as you're going through life, kind of like Pilgrim's Progress, like it's not just, oh, I made the decision, I'm perfect forever. It's like the daily, I have to decide that I'm not the master of my own life. I have to constantly give that back. And that is tricky.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, just making that book or the trilogy really real, I think that's huge because so many of things, Christian things today are really just sappy or way too cliche. And if they are marketed as Christian, uh, non-Christians aren't really going to read them, but
Right.
kind of plugging into the world to kind of, yeah, get that perspective, I think is really cool.
Well, I think you definitely touched on a topic that I've tried to write about before, was not necessarily being overt about your faith and stuff, but making it part of who you are. And the same thing with what I'm writing. It's not necessarily like I'm throwing out you need to be like this. It's about having this exemplar of this person, and then you can talk about it. And it's not vital that you have to be a believer in order to enjoy these books. You just need to understand that Mike is trying to figure things out in his life, just like everybody is. And if it inspires, or at least makes you kind of question yourself a little bit, maybe that's part of what I have in there.
Hmm. What would you say is coming next for you? Do you have any kinds of things lined up? I know obviously like the end of the trilogy, but have you kind of been thinking about like what's next, or are you still
um
deep in it?
honestly, that's the other part that's kind of holding me back on finishing the trilogy. Is I have another idea, and I really want to move on to that also. And my attention's kind of divided. So I want to kind of stay in the same world. So my books take place in the Catskill Mountains of New York,
Mm,
which is kind of a tight community. Has an influx of um, people during ski season. There are a lot of skiing opportunities up there. A lot of influx during the camping season, but the core people are the core people. And um, yeah, I kind of grew up in that area, or just outside of that area. So I want to keep focusing on that. It's kind of it's my kind of my niche over there. So I have a new character I want to explore. He's kind of more of an older, grizzled kind of law enforcement officer who has he's never really kind of dedicated himself at all towards anything. He's in New York we have you can work as part-time as a police officer. So he and that's what he's known for. He never commits to anything. He's a part-time police officer at multiple places. He's a volunteer firefighter, and he just kind of has like no direction at all. And he gets an opportunity, because of his law enforcement background, his firefighting background, to become a canine handler with a what is it called? It's an arson dog, but it's an accelerant detector dog. And
mm,
so I kind of want to explore this guy who he's been through failed marriages, he's been through nothing but failure in his life, and he has kind of this new opportunity that comes out of nowhere for him. And I'd really like to develop that idea over a series, and obviously the adventures he goes through with becoming a canine handler, investigating specific, still keeping my crime, my procedural kind of background with his casework, but also exploring his personal life and kind of watching him develop at this kind of this crisis point in his life where it's here's a new path and here's a new thing. Let's see where this takes you.
mm-hmm.
So I'm really, really interested in following that character down, and unfortunately, the third book is in the way right now.
But that, I mean, those themes are important. Like, people who feel like they are stuck in their ways. You've done the same thing for so long, and then all of a sudden change hits you out of nowhere. Like, how do you handle that? Um,
Yeah. Plus, it has a dog, it has fire, it still has mystery, and I'm hoping, marketing wise, people really, really like that. So,
yeah,
you know,
dogs and fire and mysteries. What can be better than that?
yeah, I did an event over the weekend where I was kind of explaining my independent publishing journey to a small crowd of folks in the Catskills, and I was talking to the person who runs the community center afterwards, and I explained this whole idea to her, and she says, "Oh, I love a dog that has a job." I'm like, "Cool,
I would argue all dogs have a job just
yeah,
being dogs,
absolutely,
like they're
yep."
just cute and they just do their thing. But that's hilarious. So talking about your independent publishing journey, what would you say is the hardest part about being an author?
Um, time and money.
Mm,
Um, so I found that as I was I got asked to do this independent publishing presentation by this community center. I'd previously spoken there twice, so and they've been extremely supportive. So they said, hey, would you do this? And I said, absolutely. You guys have been great. So so I've been working on this PowerPoint and this presentation over the last couple of weeks, and that was the big theme that came out of it. Was it costs a lot of time and it costs some money. I wouldn't say a lot of money, but it costs some money. So if you're going to do it, you really are making an investment. And you talk about, family and what's important. Last year so I released the first book basically during last winter. So it was October into the winter time. So I didn't, so I did all I started doing podcasts. I started kind of doing all the online stuff, but I never had a chance to do in-person sales. So I wanted to try that, see what that was like. So I did a couple of events in the spring, going into the summer, really enjoyed that, really, really enjoyed talking to people in person. Even if they didn't buy a book, I was like, hey, I got to have a great conversation. Plus I still gave them a bookmark that had my link to Amazon. So, I kind of watched, so you had the marketing business end, but it was also great to just meet people. So when I released the second book at the end of the summer going into the fall, where I live, also every town in my county has a street fair. And it's just, they close down a street or two and it's just endless, people selling knickknacks and clothes and all sorts of stuff. So I wanted to do that. So I ended up signing up, I think almost every weekend in September and October to do that. And, with varied success. I had, some successful days. I had some less successful days. I had a lot of success doing things right in the Catskills. And, when I turned around, to start planning for this year, my wife was like, you're not around. And I said, you're right. And we have a 12-year-old daughter who is, she gets involved in soccer and volleyball, and both of them are fall sports. And then they turn around and have like spring developmental leagues. So the fall and the spring, those two specific times, are very busy. And I'm involved in both. I'm also the volleyball coach now. I never played volleyball. I'm a coach now. So I'm kind of very invested in this stuff. And when it came to trying to balance regular life with trying to, develop this author business and this writing stuff, they started really, kind of hitting. And it was like, all right, well, we need to focus on what's important now. So, and I argued and I argued and I argued, but I couldn't, disagree with where my wife was coming from when she said, we only have a certain amount of time, the three of us, someday my daughter's going to graduate from high school and go college and do her life. She goes, you can do whatever you want to do then. Right now, you need to be a lot more mindful of the time that you do have. So she's not saying I absolutely can't do these things. It's just balancing it out a little bit more. So I'm kind of looking, instead of doing every single one, I'm trying to be a little bit more strategic about how I do those things. And then when it comes to money, I'm fortunate enough to kind of have a little bit of extra money to kind of invest in this. I also worked a ton of overtime last year, the first half of the year. So I was able to take anything I made extra and kind of invest in this. So I did, putting out the books was a big investment. On top of, I went to a ton of conferences to meet authors and kind of work on the networking aspect of things. So, which also was a lot more time because each event's 3 or 4 days. You're flying, you're staying somewhere, you're away from your family. So, kind of balancing that out this year a little bit more as opposed, so. If you're going to do it, it costs money and it costs time.
Yeah, that life balancing thing is always the tricky part. I do pottery, and I used to do pottery festivals, and there was a year I did one, like it was like 9 weekends out of the fall, which is a lot, if you're doing it by yourself, and it does wear on you after a while. I mean, even just saying the same things over and over, it's like, I'm gonna go crazy.
Yep.
Um, but Are you able to do other ways, like marketing your book in other ways where, similar to this podcast, where you can kind of have it always marketable, even if you're not there, like putting them in bookstores, things like that?
I haven't done bookstores yet. I unfortunately had a negative experience with a local independent bookstore, which I shouldn't let
Mm.
color my entire experience, but I kind of tried to, ask them about doing an event there, and they were basically like, "Hey, we're too busy, to deal with you." And they said, if you wanted to bring down a couple of books, we'll put them in the local author section. I went to the local author section, and it was like the bottom right corner of, so no one would have found me if they weren't looking. So, that was a little disheartening. I know there are plenty of great independent bookstores out there, and I need to explore that a little bit more. It was just, I kind of got an initial sour taste, and I was like, well, I'm not gonna utilize my time in that way. I'm going to try some other things. So going on podcasts has kind of been my thing. Cause again, it's interacting with somebody. I love having conversations like this and meeting different people who have different audiences and just, talking about stuff. So I find that really good. I'm trying to do the social media thing. I'm not really that great at it. And that also takes time because I'm not just going to put, you know, innocuous stuff out there. I want to put something out there that's worth, looking at, that's going to, worth somebody, doing that little, like icon. I'm definitely not a TikTok person. That's not my generation. Instagram, I can't figure that, I don't know how to be strategic with that. So I'm mostly just on Facebook. I have a newsletter, that again takes time to put in worthy content that I'm putting out there, so people really, feel like they're getting some value for, double clicking on my email every week. So I went from weekly to bi-weekly to I haven't done anything in a couple of weeks. So I have a couple of different things out there. It's just it's tough because I was so varied and trying to concentrate on one specifically, or a couple specifically that are more effective. And then I also am working with a consultant on fixing my Amazon ads so that, when people are scrolling through looking for, mysteries that take place in the Catskills, my book comes up.
Yeah,
And
awesome.
making sure all that digital stuff works out too, which is hard and also not how my brain works.
Oh yeah, it's digital world is not my strong suit either, but yeah, maybe that's good bonding time with your daughter. You can get her
I've
to help
had
you
that
figure that stuff
suggestion.
out.
I've had that suggestion a couple of times, like, oh, have your daughter help you with TikTok. I'm like, she's not on TikTok, and that's not going to happen.
Right, yeah,
But
yeah. The internet's a scary place. I
yes.
don't blame you. When would you say you made it as an author? When is like the defining moment?
Um, for me, the defining moment was when I just decided I was going to put it out there. Um, I know I'm not going to be Stephen King um, or Michael Conley or any that's I don't have those kind of aspirations to really kind of get past there. I'm happy to get the book out there. I'm happy to meet people that um, enjoy my book and talk about it with them. I'm happy to talk about people who are walking by, see the cover, and say, "Hey, that looks interesting. Let me ask this person." Or, "Oh, my aunt loves mysteries. Maybe I'll get this for and I can talk to them about that. And again, I'm not a hard seller. I'm not this. My life doesn't depend on me selling books. My life depends on my family, you know, existing and things like that. And this is a hobby that I'm hoping to turn into a little bit more successful than just, you know, I'm repeating myself a little bit, excuse me. A hobby that makes a little bit of money, but I don't have any designs on being anybody famous or anybody huge. I just want to produce some stuff and have the interactions with folks that, say, hey, I really like that. And that's
Hmm.
cool. That's what made it for me. The first review I got, or the first person who came back to me, because again, I sold the first book. I started selling the first book the end of 2024. So by 2025, I had people who had read the first book and wanted to read the second book and came and talked to me about both books. That was a really cool feeling.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
and then I had people yelling at me like, "I didn't know it was going to be a trilogy." I'm like, "It says it on the first page." And they're like, "Oh, I can't wait that long." And I'm like, "I know," and that's why I also have all this pressure to finish the third book, because there's people who really do want to know how it ends. There's not a ton of them, but there are people who are, waiting to find out. So that's a really cool feeling too.
Yeah, that's awesome. Your loyal following. So, do you have a specific release date for that third book?
No, I do not. I
I don't
have
blame you.
I have designs, because I also know when it comes to the business end of things and marketing, um, how I do this third book is really going to make or break the whole trilogy. Because if I'm able to build enough anticipation for the third book, I know I can get people to go back and get the first and the second book. So it's kind of like, I have one more chance at this, because once I get the
Mm,
third book out there, if I fumble with this, it's kind of all right. It existed. I'll continue to sell it. I'll continue to promote it, but it's kind of, I know I have one last chance to kind of have a shot at this, and I really want to make the most of that. And again, I want this book. I want the third book to be, you know, the icing on the cake. I want people to walk away super super gratified. I watched too many television series lately that have just fumbled in the end, and I really want to nail this, and that's my focus. So I don't really want to get into when that book's coming out, because I really don't know. But I also want to keep in touch with the marketing and the release, kind of building that anticipation also. But I need to have a finished book first, and I don't have that at all.
yeah, but I really appreciate your passion for your craft. You're not just rushing to finish just to say you finished. You're taking the time to really make this something that you're proud of and that um, your following would really enjoy as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this was an idea that you know God put this in my head. Honestly, I mean, you know, that moment came for a reason, and I really want to follow this out. Because I've kind of shucked some other ideas in the past and kind of just let them kind of wither on the vine, and exists for a reason. So I want to make sure, again, I want to nail the ending. I want to nail that.
Yeah. Well, I wish you the best of luck
Thank you.
um, in finishing your book and in the next ones to come. Do you have any last advice, last words to the listeners out there?
If you're a creative person, no matter what it is and whatever inspires you, if you have something, put it out in the world. Because nobody's going to appreciate it if it's in your head or in your basement, or you know, wherever you store your creative ideas. If you're producing something, no matter what it is, put it out there in the world. Let people see it. Let people give them the opportunity. Because there's going to be people that are critical of it, and there's going to be people that are going to love it. So just listen to the love, listen to the people who are out there supporting you, and it's great, and you're doing something worthwhile with the talents that you're given.
Great advice. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Until next time, once you have published your third book, we'll have to have you back so we can
I'll
hear
reach
all
out to
about
you.
it.
I'll
All
reach
right,
out to you
sounds
then.
great. Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan.